Eu passo a palavra agora para a professora Leigh Payne, que é professora de Sociologia e Fellow do St. Anthony's College da Oxford University e autora do livro Unsettling Accounts, Neither Truth Nor Reconciliation in Confessions of State Violence.
Bom, não está? Sim? Bom, eu vou fazer a apresentação em inglês, porque o meu português está um pouco ruim nesse momento. Não estou falando muito bem, faz muito tempo que não falo português, e é um trabalho que não tenho escrito em português, assim, um pouco mais difícil. Mas a próxima vez que venho a Brasil para fazer esta apresentação, eu prometo fazer a apresentação em português. Mas se vocês podem pegar os aparelhos, porque afinal eu quero passar um vídeo de Sudáfrica, e é um inglês um pouco mais difícil para compreender, porque falam, inglês não é a língua materna das pessoas que estão falando no vídeo. Ok? Não sei se tem possibilidade de fazer... Bom... Rafael, você tem o flash? Porque não é a apresentação que eu quis. Neste flash, o pen drive. Sim, queria ver.
Como vocês podem perceber, estamos vivendo um pequeno problema técnico aqui. Esperamos resolver rapidamente.
Agora sim, desculpa. Bom, ok, sorry. Pronto? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to speak from two different projects that I've been working on. The first one is the Unsettling Accounts book, and that's a book about confessions, public confessions made by perpetrators of state violence in Argentina, Chile, Brazil, South Africa. And then I'm going to also, the Brazil chapters are called Silence and Fiction and Lies, and I'll talk about that later. The second project is coming out in 2010, and it's a data analysis of transitional justice around the world. That's the Transitional Justice in Balance book. So there are two questions that I want to ask, or one main question I want to ask, which is why, or to have or not to have a Truth Commission in Brazil. And I want to look at both questions of why to have a Truth Commission based on these comparative experiences, but also why not, or under what conditions it might be, or a cautionary tale of whether to use a Truth Commission or not to deal with Brazil's violence. The results of our database project would give a very cautionary tale for the Brazilian experience, because we find that Truth Commissions, statistically speaking, and when used by themselves, have a negative impact on two measures, on democracy and on human rights. We've also found that Truth Commissions used in combination with trials alone or with amnesties alone have no statistical significance. In other words, they don't seem to be statistically, at least statistically, related to improvements in democracy and human rights violations. But what we do find, which is the good news about transitional justice, is that transitional justice as a whole has a positive effect on democracy and human rights measures, and also that Truth Commissions, when used with trials and amnesties, have a positive effect for democracy and human rights improvements. So, but the cautionary tale also is that trials and amnesties alone, without Truth Commissions, also have a positive impact on democracy and human rights. I'll show you the data here. So if you look at this data, what we have on the left are the measures that we used for democracy and human rights. For democracy, we looked at the Freedom House measures, and we also looked at Polity 4. Which are standard social science measures, controversial in some cases, but really all we have to measure democracy. And then for human rights, we looked at the political terror scale results and the physical integrity scale by Cingranelli and Richards. And so if you see on the very left, on the left side, okay, this may be better. On the left side, you see that transitional justice overall had a positive impact. Oh, okay. Had a positive impact for democracy and human rights. But you can also see that trials, truth commissions, and amnesties had a positive impact on democracy and human rights. This is the negative finding, that when truth commissions were used by themselves, which is not very common, but when used by themselves, they have a statistically significant but negative impact on democracy and human rights. Okay, I want to show you another table. You can't see this very well, but this is a table just on Latin America, and these are not statistical findings. They're just a summary of the data on Latin America. So if you look at the top part, the dark blue countries are countries that all use this combination of trials, truth commissions, and amnesties. And you see the positive results from using those three mechanisms, or at least the appearance of positive results for using those three mechanisms. But this is not exactly a causal table. If you look at the bottom, these are cases in which those three mechanisms were not used in Latin America, in the Latin American countries. And you also see some positives, but also more negatives than you do at the top of the table. The Brazil case is the one we're most interested in today. Some people may challenge whether or not there was a truth commission in Brazil already, but using the definition of investigations around certain types of violence, an official investigation, we put the reparations committee in there as a truth commission. But you could also leave it out, and it wouldn't change these results. The negative outcome in terms of human rights in Brazil, and also the negative outcome, at least on one of the measures of democracy, particularly civil liberties. And this is 10 years after the transition. Okay? So we're looking at what kind of impact these mechanisms had 10 years after the transition. So what does all this research have to do with the panel's topic, and that is unrevealed truths? Part of what I wanted to do today is to draw a little bit on the work I did on perpetrators' confessions, and to think about what kind of role truths that come from perpetrators have for democracy and human rights. And to answer that question, I want to talk a little bit about the Unsettling Accounts book. The findings that we have is that, that the probability for negative outcomes in using truth commissions is stronger than we would expect, than we would have expected when we began the project. And one of the reasons why we think that's the case is that sometimes the truths that are exposed in truth commissions have a, evoke a kind of demand for justice for the events in the past. And so truth commissions can work together with trials to provide both the truth about the past and the justice for those violations in the past. But one of the other problems with the Truth Commission, however, is with the quality of the truth that comes out of these processes. We've heard some really powerful testimonies during our 2 days here at the conference that have exposed us to the kinds of violations that occurred in the past. But the people in this room are probably the people who are the most sensitive and aware of those violations. How much do these truths get told outside of and heard outside of these rooms, these kinds of conversations? And so a Truth Commission provides the possibility for not only to share the truths from individuals who've gone through this past, but also to express it for society. And this is what we reflected on yesterday, that the truth is not, the right to truth is not just for the victims alone, although that is extremely important, but also for a wider understanding in society to, in a sense, inoculate society from returning to the violent past. a couple of the different presentations yesterday noted that the truth in Brazil is known because of Nunca Mais, because of the activism on the part of family members and the human rights community. Those truths are somewhat known, but there has been the absence of information and documentation and files from the perpetrators of violence. And so the question was asked, how do you get the perpetrators of violence to provide this documentation? The case I want to reflect on is the South African case, and because it was raised as the sort of model for how you can convince perpetrators to present this information. It is an innovation on truth commissions by tying amnesty for the perpetrators to the confession of political crimes committed during the apartheid era. But even with that incentive, even with that motivation, instrumental motivation to bring perpetrators forward, the kinds of truths that were told were very select. And I put up here 5 policemen who were part of a death squad in South Africa. They did go forward and they did confess in exchange for amnesty, but they also failed to tell everything about what happened. That was one problem. The second problem is that not all of the perpetrators did come forward. In fact, a fairly small fraction of perpetrators came forward. These 5 are an example of the kinds of perpetrators who came forward and their reasons for coming forward. Next slide. And this also ties up to this link of truth commissions and justice. One of the criticisms of the South African case is that those perpetrators who did not go forward with their confessions or who didn't get amnesty have never been tried. In other words, the process tied confession to amnesty, but the perpetrator who was unwilling to risk the social stigma to go forward and confess won, because there's been no trial for those individuals who either didn't go forward or who were denied amnesty. But this person up here, Eugene de Kock, did get tried before the Truth Commission process began. He was tried for his leadership of the death squad called Black Place that the 5 policemen were involved in. He was the head of the death squad. His nom de guerre, his alias was Prime Evil. And he went to court, was found guilty for leading this death squad, and proceeded to he was sentenced then to 212 years in jail. This was, for him, a betrayal on the part of the high command. The commanders took no responsibility for organizing this death squad, for rewarding him for his killing, and he received all sorts of rewards and medals for participating, as well as money for being the head of this death squad and his efficiency in the death squad. And then he took the fall, and in his view, took the fall for the entire apartheid regime. He famously made the statement about, now no one was in favor of apartheid after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because he felt betrayed by the high command, he began to name names. And he went through not only his commanders, but also began to name names of those below him who had carried out some of these acts. That, and not the promise of amnesty, well, the promise of an amnesty was there, but the threat of trial was more crucial to get the 5 policemen to come forward and tell their stories. This is a very complicated issue to think about, because that betrayal means the breaking up of the unity of the armed forces, something that I don't think has happened in Brazil. That the kind of unity of the military people don't come forward and confess, don't come forward and bring information, because no one is being tried. No one is being threatened with trial. No one is being betrayed by the process. Right? And keeping that institutional, sort of unity and strengthens the institution rather than begins to wear away and have some people come forward to admit to what they did. The other problem with these kinds of truth commissions is what happens after. And the book that I work on is dealing with the political implications of these confessions. The argument that I make is that these truth commissions do not necessarily bring democracy, greater democracy, or deterrence of human rights violations, but they do begin a democratic process. Because when individuals speak out, when individuals confess about the past, even if they give the kind of heroic confession of, say an Alfredo Astiz, who in a famous, the Argentine perpetrator, who in a famous interview with the journal Tres Puntos said, I was the best trained assassin in Argentina, and if called on, I would do it again. He's now under detention. But this kind of heroic confession can also provoke, catalyze a debate in democratic society and begin that kind of political expression and debate over the past that provides at least the possibility of challenging what happened publicly and in a public forum. It also gives a chance to say, when an individual comes forward and talks about the heroism of the past, to say, is this heroic? In the case of Astiz, shooting a teenager on the street, is that a heroic act? Is that an act of that's noble and that we want to support? And it exposes that kind of violence. Putting the voices of the perpetrators can be dangerous because it gives them a stage, a platform to present their views, but it also offers an opportunity to challenge and to debate the past and bring it into the open a bit more. I want to just close with a last clip. Yeah, we don't need to do this. Just move right to the vídeo. Before you, antes do vídeo, por favor. Before I show you this video, I want to set it up a little bit because I think it kind of it captures, in a sense, some of the dangers of expectations of truth commissions. In this case, Van Vuren, who was Paul Van Vuren, who was one of the 5 policemen who came forward because of the fear that he would be prosecuted based on de Kock's testimony about their acts in the death squad. He went forward to the Amnesty Committee and gave his confession. And one of the cases that he confessed to was the killing of a black policeman named Motassi. And he killed the black policeman as part of this death squad because he was, or they were, convinced that he was going to talk, that he was going to tell the stories, tell the secrets about the death squad. And to silence him, they killed him. When they went to his house, his wife witnessed the murder, and so they killed her as well. But they left their little boy, who was 3 years old at the time, Motassi. After Van Vuren confessed to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Amnesty Committee and received amnesty, he decided that this was, that he had been stigmatized in a very negative way as a killer, as an assassin, and so he asked the TV crew to come with him to have a forgiveness encounter with the young Motassi. And so I want to show you this encounter between Van Vuren and Motassi, talking about this experience in the past, and then have some reflections about that.
How are you? I'm glad to hear that. Okay. Hello, Mandla. How are you? I'm fine. Listen, let me tell you, now, all the people always say, we must say sorry, we must say sorry. Are you sorry? Are you? And to say, just to say I'm sorry, is an empty word. You know what I mean? Can you really be sorry? I didn't, it's the first time in my life, no, it's the second, no, it's the third time in my life that I meet you. But, sorry, I'm not the type of person that come and says, I'm sorry. I don't even know you, you know what I mean? If I look back at the whole what happened in apartheid and now, then I'm sorry about what happened to your parents and to you, because it was a waste of human life. I'm sorry for that. I know that you must hate me. I know if somebody killed my parents, and I would feel maybe I would have been much more hateful than you. And I can't really say how would I feel. I can just imagine how would I feel.
Like I don't have parents.
Yes.
My granny can die any day because she's old now.
Yes.
So if she dies, who's going to take care of me?
Yes, that's a difficult question. You can come and live with me. I'll look after.
Like as you told me, it's very hard to say. It's very hard to say you are sorry. Yeah. But for me, it's like you did something very bad. See? Yeah. And like I can't forgive you. I can't because it's very hard for me.
Okay. I understand.
The context. Yeah, I mean, the explanation is that Van Vuren was the one who went in and killed his parents because they thought his father, who was a black policeman, was going to tell the stories about the death squad. And they left the boy, and he was found, he spent the night with his dead parents, the mother and the father, and the grandmother, he refers to, the granny, he talks about, found him the next day, having spent the night with his dead parents at 3 years old. And so he went to live with his granny, and of course there was no revelation about this incident until the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Then the policemen came forward, prompted by their fear that de Kock was going to name them, and then the prosecutor's office would prosecute them. So for that reason, they went to the Amnesty Committee and asked for amnesty and got it. Why Van Vuren wanted to do this forgiveness encounter is really about a public relations stunt, right? When you went in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, they were televised, and there was a weekly program that summarized what had happened in the Truth Commission that week. And so it was all over television that he had killed this young child's parents and left the young child in the house. So he went, asked the crew to come with him. It wasn't the television company's idea. He invited them to come with him to have this forgiveness encounter. But he didn't expect it. Van Vuren did not expect it to turn out the way it did. He thought that, in the spirit of reconciliation, Ubuntu, the kind of language of Tutu, that the young Mutasi would embrace him and forgive him. But if you listen to the words that he uses, and this is what I mean about the unrevealed truth, he does not say, I did this to you, and it was wrong. He instead has a kind of language that distances himself as though it was a natural disaster that happened, and he feels sorry for that thing that happened. It was almost out of Van Vuren's control. But the odd thing that happens in this little clip is that the table gets flipped, and the very powerful Van Vuren is suddenly under the power of the young Mutasi, who says, no, I can't forgive you. You did something very, very wrong, and I can't forgive this. But he also does something else. He extracts from Van Vuren the promise that Van Vuren will take care of him. Now, of course, Mutasi is not going to go live with the killer of his parents, but he got Van Vuren to accept a responsibility on camera. And in response to this, Van Vuren left the television studio, drove to his father's game farm, killed every impala he could find in sight, in this rage that he had been on television, being held accountable for what he had done to this child, right, and his parents. So that action, that holding him accountable, did not occur in the Amnesty Committee. It occurred outside in this interaction that Van Vuren thought he could control. And so part of the point of the work that I am doing is to say these truths, first of all, are very sanitized, often very impersonal, often don't even reveal a lot more detail than we already know about the past, right, that we've already seen and have documented. In fact, sometimes they admit much less than what we already know. But they have this catalyst for being able to start to discuss it and for holding those individuals accountable in ways that truth commissions sometimes cannot through this public process and public dialogue. In this particular case, he got his amnesty, but he was still held accountable because of attempting to control the story. And he couldn't control the story because the young Mutasi, who I'm using in this clip as a sort of symbol of society challenging that version of the truth, that sanitized version of the truth, the unwillingness to be held accountable and to take responsibility for individual acts as well as the systemic violence. And that way opening up a kind of truth that could not be as possible without the confession. So how I want to conclude is that truth commissions, and using this as a kind of stand-in for different kinds of processes, truth commissions don't often, make for better democratic institutions. They don't necessarily imply a lot of the democratic rights that we would expect to see in the standard social science measures of democracy. They may not deter future violations. But one thing that it did do, it also can't bring reconciliation, as this case shows. I mean, how do you reconcile after this kind of violence? Maybe you can coexist, but maybe not reconcile. But one thing that truth commissions can do is begin this democratic dialogue about the past and the debate and the possibility of challenging a truth that perpetrators hold about that violation in the past. The question is, I guess the point is to limit the expectations around truth commissions and figure out, and this echoes some of the conversation yesterday, what it is exactly that is possible out of a truth commission and how justice or accountability might also be possible, even if not in a formal way. How do you have the kinds of holding individuals accountable like Mutasi did in this environment? And in the end, what I would say is this sort of justice and an amnesty case that I showed you in the beginning project suggests that perhaps truth commissions that do combine some form of accountability with the stability that amnesty plays can be a positive experience, and particularly if they reveal truths that begin a debate in society. Thank you.